Welcome, everybody, to the Right Habit podcast. Today, I'm talking to the novelist Johanna Kirwan, and she has just published her debut novel, Seven Lives, a story about seven women who have worked across development aid sectors, across the world, across decades. And it's absolutely fascinating. I've been on this book journey as a coach and as a publisher, and I'm so happy to have you here, Johanna. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
So I'll say a little bit about you, Johanna. You are actually an expert in international development. You've spent your life, your career over 3 decades, spanning the UN, NGOs, the private sector, and your work has taken you everywhere: Asia, Middle East, Africa, and given you a deep insight and sometimes a painful insight into how international development, global aid, has worked over time, how it works for women, what holds people back, and also what are the fantastic surprises that can come out of such a career. If someone should write a book like this about women in international development, you are probably one of the few that really have that deep insight.
Thank you very much, Nicole. To be frank, I wanted to write a book that wasn't just about international development, but was really about some of the personal challenges that you encounter when you are working in another country. And when I started, I was very young. I went overseas when I was 22 and very naive. I wanted to write stories about the countries that I have lived in a way that captured some of the experiences that I had in each country at a different time in my life. And so by writing this as fiction, it was a great opportunity for me to recall the experiences in each of these countries at a very different phase of my own life, but also by writing it through the lens of a fictional character, I was able to detach. And so I was able to really reflect on not only the issues that the particular person might be going through within the country itself, but also on the country and, of course, the development issues, but very much looking at it through a personal lens.
Yeah. And of course, you could write textbooks and nonfiction books and reports about all of that. And all of that is valuable. And you have done many of those things. But at the same time, all of those don't really tell you about what it means as a young woman to go into a country that you've probably never seen before and where you're just thrown into that culture. And then 3 years later, boom, the next country. What that means to your identity, to your way of working, how you see yourself, how you relate to others, how you make friendships, how you fall in love, all of that is so rich. And that is something that is very hard to bring across in some sort of technical book. Did you ever think about writing it as memoir? So really saying, I did this and Johanna, because I know that you wrote from the viewpoint of 7 different women in 7 different countries in 7 different time frames. How did you make the decision of not saying this is a memoir?
Well, when I first started, I wrote very much from my perspective. It was almost as a memoir. Then when I closed the chapter, I didn't revisit the idea of writing the book because I was busy working and I really didn't have the time and I wasn't quite sure what direction I wanted to take with the book. I then thought the book would be far more interesting to be written in the sense of fiction. There are very few books on international development that are written as fiction. There are many that are written as textbooks or even memoirs of working overseas, which are fascinating. I read a lot of them. But a book that deals with women working overseas, what they have to give up or what they may have to compromise, or what they may have to decide as a priority, I thought would be very interesting to tackle that and go beyond my own experience, my own recollection of my work, and to reflect it from that perspective and not make the book about me, but really make it about, number one, the women in different stages of their career, different ages, and what what impacts them at those ages, working in a culture which is not their own. Also, the aspect of the country itself. We read about places such as Nepal, South Sudan, Pakistan, but we see sometimes these countries in a negative perspective, or as countries demanding funding or needing resources or anything else. But there is so much richness, so much culture in each of these countries, so much learning that certainly I encountered in every country, but also in the sense of in development, we come in believing that we are some sort of experts in all of these areas. And really, we're learning. We're learning as we go. And it has to be a symbiotic relationship where you're really working with local expertise and then adapting your own level of knowledge and expertise to fit within that particular culture and that within that particular country and its socioeconomic political issues.
There are 7 parts. There are 7 countries. We have Nancy, Lisa, Marie Louise, Rebecca, Anna, Gita, Patricia, and they are in Nepal, South Sudan, Lesotho, Pakistan, Egypt, the United States, and the Philippines. And all of these are across different decades. And as I'm reading this out, obviously when you're in the book, when you're turning the pages, it's beautiful because you are with one woman and her journey in that country and the important moments. But there is obviously a complexity. I think it would be really hard to bring all of this into a book if you weren't able to find a way of structuring it. And in your case, it was the 7 women. I think it's fair to say that parts of these women come from you and your experiences that you have taken the liberty to fictionalize. I wonder if we could go a little bit into Nancy in Nepal because she is the newbie. She is the beginner. She's coming into the country as an engineer, as a water engineer. And all the hopes, all the dreams, everything that you think about when you come into, let's say, Kathmandu and you think you're going to change the world and you meet all these other young volunteers and everybody is so excited. But then you meet the reality. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit about what happens to Nancy and for Nancy in the very first chapter.
Nancy is a young lass of about 22 when she arrives in Nepal, and all she knew about Nepal was this was the land of the Himalayas and not much else.
Mm.
With all the idealistic expectations that she was going out with her expertise, which was what, 1 to 2 years of experience and a degree in civil engineering, and that she was going to change Nepal. So, or maybe not change it, but she was going to have a significant impact. And that rather expatriate perspective that many young people can have when they first go out to a country that they consider is less developed than their own. There is this perspective that everybody is some sort of receptacle for your level of expertise and information rather than stopping, looking, learning, and listening. And what happens very much with Nancy, Nancy lives in villages, learns the language, speaks Nepali, but she doesn't speak it very well. So when she's on her first assignment, she's incapable of even asking for her evening meal or where she's supposed to go to wash herself. But she still dictates exactly how the construction project should go ahead without listening sufficiently to local expertise. And hence, the first site that she selects for constructing a septic tank for the school ends up being wrong because she didn't listen to the Nepali construction foreman. She decided that she knew best and went ahead, and of course, was a miserable failure. And then Nancy went on to spend about 4.5 years in Nepal, learning that she didn't really know anything, and that she really had to relearn all the skills that she learned during her degree, and then starts just before she leaves, at the age of about 26 or so, to really understand that she's only at the beginning of understanding what it is to work in development.
Yeah, and that's a hard school to go through in your early 20s. Throughout the book, all these different women in their own stages, at their own stages of career, and with the specific country context, they are all learning a lesson. I'd love to jump to Patricia in the Philippines, who is, I don't want to say the opposite of Nancy, but she is older and wiser, and she comes into the Philippines decades later. So tell me about Patricia.
Patricia's in her early to mid 50s during her time in the Philippines. She comes as the head of the UN agency that she's working with there, and she's joining her partner there who's already working within Manila. Patricia is also far more cynical, far more prepared when things go wrong. Patricia has been around the block a lot more than the likes of Nancy, but she also is in a senior position and understands that she's got two ways of going forward. She can either go further up within her organization, or she fights against some of the aspects of just compliance with how an agency can work, particularly a UN agency. Will she comply with some of the expectations that one has, or will she knock against them because of her own beliefs and her own moral values?
What is it that traumatizes her so much? Why is she sinking so low after having achieved so much? It's almost like you wouldn't expect that woman in the story to have such heartbreak.
Patricia knows that she's at a crossroads. She also has the dilemma of trying to balance her private life with taking senior positions within the UN system. What happens is that her supervisor, a very senior woman within the UN system, she clashes with her. These were issues that Patricia wouldn't step down on. There is an aspect within organizations, not just the UN, of women in senior positions not supporting other women in senior positions. But when women in senior positions work well with each other, my goodness, those are the best working relationships, because then really so much gets done, so much can be affected. For Patricia, that wasn't the case. If you look at the statistics, you'll find even within the UN system, there's far more women leaving from their mid-50s than there are men, through being encouraged to take early retirement, to step out of the system, and whatsoever, whereas the figures for men, far less.
Yeah. And women make a lot of other sacrifices throughout the careers, at least in the way it comes through in the book. Will you talk a little bit about how possible is it for women to find love and to start a family if they wish?
When you're working in a country for, 3, 4, 5 years, you're condensing your life that you would in your own country. Relationships, work experiences, friendships. You're experiencing all of that in a shorter time frame. How often do we create a home if we're living in the UK or the US? Maybe every 10 years. We might be setting up, buying a new house, setting it up, and moving, but you're doing that every 3 to 5 years in development. If you're meeting your partner in a country where you're working, then you have the added stress of, do you stay in the country? Do you leave the country? Do you ask them to leave with you? And then, of course, gets the aspect of children and moving children around countries. And friendships are difficult to sustain once you leave a country. You're accelerating the amount of time that you might develop a friendship in, from, you're bonding with people far more quickly than you would in your own country. And you're also leaning on those friendships more so than you would in your own country. For example, dealing with a typhoon response in the Philippines, working 18, 20-hour days sometimes to deal with that typhoon and the intensity of it. So all of those, it's really condensing a level of life's experience into a far shorter time frame.
Well, that fits with the title, which is Seven Lives. Of course, in the book, in the fictionalized story, those are seven women. But also, it feels like anyone who has this kind of long career is living with the intensity of far more lives than someone who stays who stays put. But also that person who stays, let's say, who stays at home or in their home country or just in one place, they are missing out on some of the things the women in your book are really thriving on and that they love. What I've thought really remarkable about the book was that the love for the country really comes through. So it's not just a book that happens to be in this setting and in that setting and this time and that time to mix it up, but every single country, it's almost like the countries are characters as well. Did that play a role for you to keep going in this difficult career?
Let's take the example of Lisa in South Sudan. There's no tarred roads. Everything is just dirt roads, very little buildings that are over 3 stories, and of course had its problems in terms of course, the war at the time. But so fascinating, such a fascinating time to be in southern Sudan in late 1985. Lisa was struck by the dedication and the motivation of people within South Sudan to want to help their own country, their own development, that was so motivated. And that aspect, that real, not just taking what we read in the press, what we see on countries, but to go beyond that. And you think, how can you really help and work understanding that you are in such a privileged position from your background, from your education, from everything, to try and really do as much as you can in these countries to help people who are far more motivated than, say, Lisa even was working within South Sudan.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the writing process because first you live this really rich, complex life, and then it's time to finally get some space. But that doesn't really seem to be your journey, Johanna. You said, okay, I'm going to write a book now. And I know that you have more books in the pipeline. What made you decide you want to turn all of these stories and memories and things you've seen and things you've lived and pain you've gone through? What made you turn it into a book and spend all that time on it?
I'm at the stage of my life now where reflection is probably really important to me, to take some of the major experiences, reflect, and also some of the ones that were more difficult to reflect on. And what did I learn from them? I found it cathartic to write about each of these countries and draw upon my own experiences while writing about the experiences of the women. It wasn't even something that I made a decision on. It was something that just kind of naturally happened. As I said, in 2016, when I started with the chapter of Nepal, it was in my mind to do this. But it wasn't until I talked to a friend of mine and said, I think I should do this. I think I should start to do this. Who's then suggested I contact you, Nicole, to help to coach out of me the stories that I knew were there. And then working with you, the book took a mind of its own. It was then easy. First, we focus on the woman. We focus on her stories, what she goes through, and we take what sort of problems would impact upon those women, but also then the focus on the country, the geopolitical situation of each of those countries, and of course, taking just one development issue that we could look at in a bit more depth. So to me, it became almost something that was just natural. It was something like, this is the phase of my life when I'm going to do this. But what it did give me, and that's probably from working with you, Nicole, was a love of writing, which I didn't know was there. I thought it was just me, writing out stories on international development. I didn't see that I had a particular desire to continue to write, nor did I have a particular gift to write. But now I feel that I do have a desire to continue writing. So my next book, which I'm writing about, my own ancestors in Ireland, um, And anything, if you really want to do something in this life, if you're motivated, you develop a gift. I love writing when I do have a chance to just write and not edit. I love it. So this is something, if you love something, you want to continue doing it and developing it and getting better at it.
And I think every writer, especially those who have had a life experience, no matter how long, sometimes they can be just super deep and not span decades, and wants to turn that either into a memoir or a book of fiction or autofiction, a novel. I think this is what drives you when there is a story that wants to come through. As you said, it almost takes on a life of its own, and you suddenly discover that you love bringing it out, you love bringing it through, and then you keep going. I wanted to ask you, Johanna, about the process of working with a small publishing house, Fire and Feather Publishing, because we did discuss in my role as your writing coach, should you query with agents and wait until you find someone and then see if you can get published in one of the traditional publishing houses, or should you take more control, be more involved, and go with Fire and Feather Publishing or any other smaller press? Now that you've gone through it, you have been quite hands-on. I feel like there hasn't been any decision where you didn't choose who is going to be the editor, what would the cover look like, do you like the font, all of those things. I feel like you've fully owned every aspect of the book. How have you found this experience? And it's totally okay if you secretly wish you had just handed it over somewhere and have it all taken off, because you are writing your next book, right? So this question is not going to go away. How you see yourself as an author in the longer run, and how you want to publish your book. Maybe that will be interesting to some of the people and authors and
Right.
want to be authors listening.
Well, number one, it would be natural for somebody with my background not to want to go to a large publishing house, want to do something where they can work with a smaller publishing company such as Fire and Feather, where you can actually have a lot more say in how your book is designed and how it goes out there, rather than handing it over and then looking, oh, I wouldn't have really chose that cover. I worked very closely with you and with the company to make sure that it was something I wanted, right down to even how the parts are laid out, with just a quick reminder for anyone where the country is. And the aspect of being involved to the last piece of work before it was printed. I actually think it's like with anything, when it's a project, it's a bit like you want to be there up to the very end. You don't want to just hand it over and feel that anything might change without, really thinking about it carefully. And maybe that also, to be honest, goes back to the way that I've worked, that there's always a beginning, a middle, and an end. So it's like any a system type approach that you take, that you want to at least sign off that you've done your best, you put everything into it, it looks like what you expected it to look like, both in the text, the cover, the presentation, and then you let it go out into the world and hope that people enjoy it.
Beautiful. I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people listening who are writers, who are storytellers, who are, giving something to the world beyond living their own life, which is already quite an achievement, to be honest. But also just making a difference in publishing a book, for example. Johanna, I want to thank you for this conversation. I know it's a very personal one because you are within all those 7 women, and also all those 7 women are within you, and probably many more. We just, couldn't make a a 5,000-page book. It's been really insightful to understand why you wrote it, how you wrote it, and to get your take on international development. So everybody should go out and find the book. It's called 7 Lives by Johanna Kirwan. It's out with Fire and Feather Publishing, and Amazon is the easiest way to find it in your country, 7 Lives. And if you do find it and you enjoy it, of course, go and leave a review. We want to hear from you how those stories resonated. And And Johanna, good luck with the next book. I know it's already started, so we will at some point be at this podcast again to talk about the next iteration of those beautiful stories that you're bringing to life. Thank you so much for talking and for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you for all of your support, because I
Oh,
don't think I would have finished Seven Lives without you.
you're so welcome.